"Mom, I'm scared. Please save me." Those 5 words were scribbled on a torn piece of white paper hidden between the stems of her bouquet, and they stopped my heart cold. And before you imagine chaos, screaming, or drama, there was none. Not yet. The music was still playing. The guests were still smiling. The officiant was clearing his throat, ready to speak about love and commitment. Only I knew that something had already gone terribly, irrevocably wrong. Let me be clear from the start. This story isn't about a wedding gone wrong. It's about a mother who realized too late for comfort, but just in time for truth, that the man her daughter was about to marry was a danger to our family. Not emotionally, not symbolically, but in the most practical, calculated, and irreversible way possible. My name is Ruth. I am 67 years old, a widow, and the mother of one daughter, Dahlia. I live on a ranch in Colorado that my late husband and I built over decades of work, patience, and sacrifice. I am not a dramatic woman. I do not imagine villains where there are none. I spent most of my life teaching history, which means I learned to respect facts, patterns, and consequences. And Jonas, the man standing at the altar that day, was a pattern I could no longer ignore. I had known for months that something was wrong. He didn't storm into our lives. He slipped in quietly, smoothly, polished, polite, perfectly placed. Dahlia met him in Denver, at a networking event. She called me afterward with stars in her voice. "Mom, I met someone different." He was different. That was the problem. From the beginning, Jonas watched the world like a man measuring it. He noticed the acres before he noticed the people, asked where the property lines ended before he asked how long we'd lived here, complimented the house, then asked if I'd considered selling parts of it for convenience. And every time I brought it up with Dahlia, every time I gently warned her, she brushed it off like lint on a sleeve. "You're just being overprotective," she said. "You never trust anyone." Then, 4 days before the wedding, things came to a boil. We were in the kitchen. I was brewing coffee. Jonas had left not 10 minutes earlier, after another too helpful conversation about trust funds and estate planning. My chest was tight from holding back, and the moment the front door clicked shut, I said it. "Dahlia, you need to slow down. He's too focused on the property. He keeps asking about deeds and boundaries and—" She turned fast, faster than I expected, her cheeks flushed. "Can't you be happy for me, just once? Just once, Mom?" I tried to stay calm. "I'm not trying to ruin this. I'm trying to protect you. I've seen men like him before. You don't know him." "No," I said, my voice firmer now. "But I know what ambition looks like. I know what manipulation sounds like. You think he loves you? Maybe. Or maybe he loves what he thinks he can get through you." And then she snapped. She reached for her mug on the counter. I don't even think she meant to throw it. But her arm flung out, and the full cup of coffee hit my shoulder and chest, scalding hot, the ceramic shattering on the floor. The pain was sharp, but the shock was worse. We both froze. Her eyes went wide, her hands to her mouth. "Mom, I didn't mean—" I raised my hand. "Don't." There was a silence between us I had never known before. Thick, final. "I have given you everything," I said quietly. "Everything. And if you walk down that aisle with that man, if you ignore everything I've tried to warn you about, I will rewrite my will. I will protect this land, this home, from whatever mistake you're about to marry. And you will not inherit a single acre." Her eyes burned. "Then I'll walk away," she said. "I'll walk away from all of it if that's what it takes. I love him, and I'm not going to let your bitterness destroy my future." She stormed out, leaving me standing there, still damp, still burning. Not just from the coffee, but from something deeper. Heartbreak. There are 1,000 ways for a mother and daughter to hurt each other. But it's not the words we say in anger that cut deepest. It's the fear underneath that maybe we've lost each other, that maybe love won't be enough. After that night, we didn't speak again until the wedding morning. I put on my best dress, smiled at guests, hugged relatives, and prepared to expose Jonas for what he was, because I still had the recordings. I still had the plan. But then she handed me that note. "Mom, I'm scared. Please save me." Her fingers brushed mine as she passed it to me, hidden behind the satin and roses of her bouquet. She didn't meet my eyes. She didn't have to. That was the moment I knew. She'd seen it too. And it broke me. just a little, that it took this much pain for her to finally see what I had tried so hard to protect her from. I folded the note and tucked it into my pocket. The music was still playing. The guests still watched with smiles. But I knew what I had to do. Because sometimes, a mother's love means saying nothing when you want to scream and then standing up when no one else will. If this story touched you, tap like and comment where you're watching from. You might not be the only one near you feeling this too. I didn't interrupt the ceremony right away. That may surprise you, but I had my reasons. I've learned that justice, like a well-made pie crust, requires patience and precision. And if there's one thing age has taught me, it's this: striking too early can ruin everything. As I sat there, note folded in the silk lining of my pocket, I stared up at the man standing beside my daughter and wondered how it had come to this. Jonas was smiling like a man who had already won. His tuxedo was tailored, his hair immaculately styled, not a wrinkle or doubt to be seen. The guests were watching him with adoration, assuming they were about to witness love's triumph. They had no idea. Behind me, the breeze stirred the aspen leaves. Their golden shimmer reminded me of the day David and I first walked this property, long before the house, the garden, the fences. Back then, we were just two people with calloused hands and a dream. We had bet everything on this land, and now it was the reason my daughter's life was at risk. The officiant was speaking. His voice was warm, practiced. I barely heard a word. My thoughts kept drifting backward, tracing the path of suspicion that had led me here. It began 6 months ago, in spring, when Dahlia first brought Jonas to the ranch. He arrived in a sleek black car, the kind you don't see often in these parts, tires too shiny for gravel. He stepped out with a bouquet in hand and that easy, polished smile that people like him wear like armor. "I'm Jonas," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "It's an honor to meet you, Mrs. Caldwell. Dahlia's told me so much about you." I remember thinking, too polished. He was the kind of man who noticed things. Not the kind most people notice, like the view or the weather. No, Jonas noticed things like lot lines and irrigation patterns, the slope of the back field, the age of the fencing. During that first dinner, he asked how much land we owned. Not directly, but in pieces like someone checking the depth of water before diving in. "Has it always been this size?" he asked, passing the mashed potatoes. "Did you and your husband expand over the years, or was it all purchased at once?" I offered a polite smile. "All at once, back in '92. We got lucky." "Oh, I'm sure it was more than luck," he said. "Location like this, just outside Denver, that's gold." It was subtle, just a comment, but it lodged in me like a burr under the skin. Dahlia, of course, didn't see it. She saw a man who opened car doors, remembered birthdays, and spoke fluent affection. After what she'd been through with her ex, the emotionally distant programmer who treated her like a scheduling conflict, Jonas felt like a blessing. I wanted to believe he was, but I knew better. By the third visit, Jonas was asking about easements and mineral rights. He joked about zoning laws and how development was creeping this far out. He wasn't just admiring our life, he was surveying it. I started keeping a journal, not because I thought it would come to this, but because I wanted a record in case it ever did. And page by page, my suspicions grew. One afternoon, while Dahlia was pruning roses in the garden, Jonas and I shared coffee on the porch. The wind was cool, scented with pine and hay. "You ever think about downsizing?" he asked, casually. "Not once," he chuckled. "Just seems like a lot for one person. What if something happened? Who would manage all this?" I stared at him. Funny. That's exactly what my husband asked me, the day before he died. He made me promise I wouldn't sell, that I'd keep it whole, for Dahlia. Jonas smiled. Smart man. His tone was warm, but his eyes were working, calculating. The next morning, I called Margaret. "I want a background check," I said. "On Jonas?" "Yes," she sighed. "Ruth, are you sure this isn't just—" "I'm sure." It took 3 days. The report arrived in a sealed envelope, hand-delivered. No digital trail, no risks. Margaret stood in my kitchen while I read. 2 prior engagements, both to women with family wealth, both broken off shortly after he gained access to family financial information. No arrests, no accusations, just quiet endings. "These families don't go to court," Margaret said. "They sign checks." End quote. I sat down at the table, the same one where David used to carve turkeys on Thanksgiving and stared at the grain of the wood. Does Dahlia know? No. And I don't know how to tell her. Margaret placed her hand on mine. Then don't. Not yet. Not until you have something she can't ignore. That's when Patricia came in. The investigator. She looked more like a school principal than a spy, gray hair and a tight bun, glasses, navy pantsuit. But she moved with quiet purpose and spoke in clear, clipped tones. "I'll find what you need," she said, discreetly. And she did. A month later, I had recordings. Jonas in his car, talking to a man named Marcus, planning, strategizing, laughing. "She'll inherit everything," he said. "The mother's old. One slip, one accident, and she's in assisted living. Once I'm in, I set up the trust, manage the estate. Dahlia doesn't even know how much it's worth. She thinks they're middle class. The Saber Supportic 7, I was not with Crease even perfected. And quote, he said all this like it was a business deal, like we were assets to be acquired. I listened to the recording in silence. Then I called Margaret and Patricia and said, "Let's go to work." Which brought me here, to this moment, to this note in my pocket. "Mom, I'm scared. Please save me." She knew. Somehow, she had figured it out. And now, it was time. I stood up from my seat slowly, smoothing my dress with shaking hands. Dahlia was facing forward, her shoulders stiff. Jonas looked over, confused. The officiant paused. "Mrs. Caldwell," he asked. I took a breath, and then I said the words that would tear the veil off everything. All eyes turned to me. I hadn't spoken loudly, but my voice sharp and certain cut clean through the gentle buzz of ceremony. The officiant froze mid-sentence, hands still poised above his little leather-bound book. Dahlia's back stiffened. Jonas tilted his head, his smile faltering just enough to reveal the crack underneath. "Mrs. Caldwell?" he asked, still trying to sound warm, amused. "Is everything all right?" I stepped into the aisle, heels crunching softly on the gravel path laid out between the folding chairs. My hand was still in my pocket, fingers closed around the note Dahlia had given me, that tiny lifeline folded so tight I could feel her desperation in every crease. "I need a moment," I said clearly, my eyes never leaving Jonas. "With my daughter," unquote. A ripple moved through the crowd confusion, a few polite coughs, the sound of camera shutters lowering. Some guests shifted in their chairs. Others looked at each other with the eager discomfort of people who suspect drama but aren't sure if it's polite to enjoy it yet. Jonas gave a soft laugh. "Is everything all right, sweetheart?" he asked Dahlia, his voice syrupy, fake. "It's just nerves, I'm sure. Come on, darling, let's not keep everyone waiting." Our priest. I could see it now, how easily he played roles. Loving fiancé, concerned gentleman, innocent victim. Dahlia turned, her face pale, eyes glossy. She didn't speak. I repeated, louder now, "I need a moment with my daughter. Alone." My voice had changed. It wasn't a request anymore. It was a declaration. Jonas recognized that. His jaw tightened. For a second, I saw something flash behind his eyes, something cold, calculating. He looked toward the crowd, tried to laugh again. "It's okay, folks, just a quick family moment, you know how weddings are." But I was already stepping up to the altar. Dahlia backed away from him instinctively, like her body knew what her mind was still catching up to. I reached her, took her hand gently, and guided her down the steps. We walked off the platform, past the first few rows of folding chairs, and around the arbor covered in late summer blooms. Only once we were out of direct earshot did I stop. "I know," I said. Dahlia blinked. "You, what?" I pulled the note from my pocket and held it up. "I've known for weeks, and I've been preparing." Her mouth opened, but no sound came. "I have a recording," I said, "of him and his friend Marcus, laying out everything how he planned to marry you, charm me, get control of the property and the estate, and then—" I paused. "And then wait for me to decline." She covered her mouth, shaking. "Oh my God." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "You heard something last night, didn't you?" She nodded, slowly. I went to his hotel room. I thought I'd surprise him. I had left my bracelet there the night before, but when I got there, he was on the phone. I heard him talking about you, about power of attorney. He laughed and said something like, "She's already halfway out the door. Won't take much to give me full control." She broke off, her voice cracking. I didn't want to believe it, she whispered. I thought maybe I misheard. Maybe I imagined it. And then I saw him this morning and I knew. But I didn't know what to do. You did exactly what you needed to do, I said. You told me. Tears welled in her eyes. But I didn't believe you. You tried to warn me and I hurt you. It sumster fively. I looked at her, my daughter, my only child, the best and hardest part of my heart, and saw her not just as the woman she'd grown into, but also the little girl who used to run barefoot across the fields, chasing fireflies with wild braids and scraped knees. I know why you didn't believe me, I said softly. Because I didn't believe my own mother once either, and I paid for it. She stared at me, blinking. You never told me that. I smiled, a sad, wry little thing. There are things we don't say until we have to, and now we have to. We stood like that for a moment longer, the mountain breeze tugging gently at the hem of her veil. Then I took a deep breath and turned back toward the gathering. Are you ready? I asked. Dahlia hesitated. Then she squared her shoulders. Yes. We walked back to the altar together. Jonas was waiting, hands clasped, trying to project calm. But I saw the tightness in his stance, the twitch in his left cheek. He knew something had changed. Sorry about that, he said with a chuckle. Everything okay? Not quite, I said. I stepped forward and turned to face the crowd. My name is Ruth Caldwell, I began, raising my voice so everyone could hear. And before we go any further, I think it's important you all hear something. Jonas stepped forward. Ruth, what are you doing? I ignored him and gestured toward the guest area. Sheriff Dawson, if you'd be so kind. A man in the third row stood slowly, middle-aged, plain clothes, badge clipped discreetly inside his blazer. He walked toward me with a small portable speaker. I took it from him, hands steady, and pressed play. Jonas's voice spilled out across the field, loud and clear. She'll inherit everything. The mother's old, one accident, and she's out of the way. The crowd gasped. Some people stood. Others clutched at each other. A woman near the back dropped her phone. The sound of Dahlia crying again echoed across the space. Jonas lunged forward. Turn that off, he shouted. This is insane. She's framing me. But he never reached me. 2 deputies moved in, pinning his arms behind him. The sheriff stepped up, voice calm but firm. Jonas Whitaker, you are being detained for questioning in an ongoing investigation related to conspiracy to commit fraud and elder exploitation. No, Jonas yelled. You can't do this. This is my wedding. He turned to Dahlia. Baby, please. But she didn't flinch. She looked at him with tears in her eyes and utter disappointment. You were never going to marry me, she said. You were just going to rob me and ruin my mother's life. He stopped struggling then. Just stared at her, like something inside him had finally broken. The guests were still murmuring, stunned. Some pulled out phones. Others turned away, trying to respect the moment, unsure what they'd just witnessed. And Dahlia, my daughter, stepped away from him, toward me. We stood side by side, watching the sheriff lead Jonas down the aisle he thought would deliver him to wealth. Instead, it delivered him to justice. Chaos has a strange sound to it when it erupts in a place that was meant for love. It wasn't screaming at first. It was gasps, chairs scraping against the ground. The rustle of expensive fabric as people stood, unsure whether to stay or flee. Someone near the front whispered, "Oh my God," over and over like a prayer that had lost its meaning. Jonas was dragged past the first row of guests, his polished shoes leaving crooked lines in the gravel aisle. His face had gone gray, the confident mask stripped away in seconds. For one brief, ugly moment, his eyes met mine, not with rage, not with fear, but with calculation. Even then, he was searching for an angle, a way out. There wasn't one. Dahlia's hand found mine. She gripped it tightly, like she used to when she was small and thunder rolled over the plains. Her wedding dress trembled against my arm, layers of white silk suddenly too heavy for the moment they were meant to celebrate. "I'm here," I whispered. "I've got you." The sheriff guided Jonas toward the edge of the property where patrol cars waited behind the trees. Marcus, his accomplice, never even made it to the ceremony. Patricia had intercepted him near the parking area, and by the time Jonas realized his friend wasn't coming to save him, it was already over. The officiant stood frozen at the altar, mouth slightly open, book dangling uselessly in his hands. He looked at me as if waiting for instructions. I said calmly. The ceremony is over. No one argued. Guests began to disperse in uneasy clusters. Some approached us quietly, offering soft words, apologies, awkward hugs. Others avoided eye contact entirely, embarrassed to have witnessed something so raw, so private, so real. Dahlia leaned into me, her forehead pressing against my shoulder. "I'm sorry," she said again, her voice hoarse. "About the coffee. About what I said. About threatening to leave." I closed my eyes for a moment. The sting of that memory, hot liquid soaking into my blouse, her angry words cutting deeper than the burn, rose up fresh and sharp. "I know," I said, "and we'll talk about it, but not today. Because today wasn't about blame. It was about survival." We walked away from the altar together, past the flowers that had been arranged so carefully that morning, past the chairs that would never hold the vows they were meant for. The music had stopped. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out, confused by the sudden silence. Behind the house, on the back porch where David and I had shared countless sunsets, we finally sat down. Dahlia collapsed onto the steps, her dress pooling around her like fallen petals. She stared out at the fields, eyes unfocused. "I feel stupid," she said. "How could I not see it? How could I choose him over you?" I sat beside her slowly, joints aching, heart heavier than my body. "Because he told you what you wanted to hear," I said, "and because I told you what you were afraid to hear." She nodded. Tears slid silently down her cheeks. "I thought you were trying to control me, that you didn't trust my judgment, that you were punishing me with money." That last word hung between us. I took a breath. "When I threatened to cut you out of the inheritance, I wasn't trying to punish you. I was trying to protect you. And myself. Money doesn't just change people, Dahlia. It attracts them. It reveals them." She looked at me then, really looked at me. "How much is it?" she asked quietly. I hesitated, then told her the truth. "The land alone is worth around $4 million now. There are investments your father made, patents from his engineering work. Altogether, about $8 million. Her eyes widened. $8 million? Mom, I had no idea." "I know, and that was intentional." She shook her head slowly. "He knew. Somehow he knew." "Yes," I said. "Men like him always find out. Or they guess, and they gamble." She swallowed hard. "And I almost paid the price." We sat there for a long time, listening to the wind move through the grass. Eventually, Dahlia spoke again. "I heard him last night," she said. "Not everything, just enough. He was talking about you like you were already gone, like you were an obstacle." My jaw tightened. "That's why I wrote the note," she continued. "I didn't trust myself to speak. I thought if I said it out loud, I might still doubt myself. But writing it, handing it to you, it felt like my last chance." I reached for her hand, squeezing gently. "You trusted your fear. That saved you." Her shoulders shook as she finally let herself cry, not the quiet, controlled tears from earlier, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place of release. I held her, rocking slightly, just as I had when she was a child. The sun had begun to dip lower by the time Patricia joined us on the porch. "It's done," she said softly. "Statements will be taken tomorrow. Jonas is being held for questioning. Marcus, too." I nodded. "Thank you." She hesitated. "You did the right thing." After she left, Dahlia rested her head against my shoulder. "Mom?" "Yes?" "If I had walked away from you, if I'd chosen him." I kissed the top of her head. "You didn't. That's what matters." It's azated. But inside, I knew something else was true. Even if she had walked away, I would have waited. Because that's what mothers do. They wait, they watch, and when the moment comes, they stand up. The morning after the wedding, that wasn't arrived, cloaked in silence. The ranch, usually alive with the hum of birdsong and the low bellow of cattle in the distance, felt like it was holding its breath. Even the wind seemed more cautious, rustling through the cottonwoods without its usual authority. I stood in the kitchen, staring out the window above the sink. The field beyond was gold and still. My hands moved on their own, measuring coffee grounds, filling the kettle, wiping the counter. Muscle memory. That's what it becomes after a while. You move, you clean, you make things warm, even when everything inside you feels cold and unsettled. Dahlia hadn't come downstairs yet. She'd slept in her old room last night, the one I never changed after she moved out. I left it exactly the way she did, books on the shelf in crooked stacks, a college photo still pinned to the corkboard, the quilt I made her the year David died folded at the foot of the bed. I didn't sleep much. I'd replayed everything again and again in my mind, the way her hand trembled when she passed me that note, the shift in Jonas's face when he realized he'd lost control, the gasps of the guests as the recording echoed over the field. It was over. But now came the reckoning. There were gifts to return, vendors to contact, rumors to be managed, and more than that, there was a life to stitch back together, not just Dahlia's, mine too. She appeared in the doorway around 8, barefoot, wrapped in the same old robe she used to steal from me in high school. Her hair was pulled back hastily, eyes tired but clear. "I made coffee," I said gently. She nodded and sat at the table. I poured her a cup, slid it across the wood. For a moment, we didn't speak. Then she said, "I dreamt he was still here." I sat down across from her. "I've had those dreams too, about people I thought I knew." She held the cup in both hands, warming her fingers. "I keep replaying it, his voice on that recording, the way he talked about you like a business transaction." I said nothing. Let her sit with it. "I can't believe I was going to marry him," she whispered. "If I hadn't gone to that hotel room, if I'd just kept walking down that aisle." "You didn't," I said firmly. "You stopped. That's what matters." She shook her head. "But why didn't I see it sooner?" "You did. You warned me. And God, I treated you like the enemy." Her voice cracked. "Because you loved him," I said. "And because loving someone makes it hard to believe they could hurt you. You saw what you wanted to see. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." Azakli disgrayed. Tears filled her eyes again. "I was cruel to you. What I said, what I did with the coffee." I reached across the table and took her hand. "That day hurt," I said honestly. "Not the burn, that healed. But hearing you say you'd walk away from me, that stayed." She nodded, eyes brimming. "But," I continued, "I would have let you go. Not because I wanted to lose you, but because that's what a mother does. We stand back, even when it breaks us, if that's what our children need to learn." In 1-4, her tears fell freely now. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." I squeezed her hand. "You don't have to deserve it. You just have to accept it." For a while, we sat in silence, the kind that only comes after rupture, soft, tentative, sacred. Then she reached for the sugar bowl and added 2 spoons to her cup. "Still the same," I said, smiling slightly. 2 spoons, no cream." She gave a soft laugh. "I guess some things don't change." I stood and moved to the pantry. "Well, one thing that's changing is breakfast. You're not getting married today, so that means you're helping me fry bacon and make biscuits." She laughed again, fuller this time, and stood to join me at the stove. The kitchen began to smell like memory flour, butter, sizzling fat. We moved around each other like we used to, the rhythm of our shared life slowly returning. Somewhere in the middle of kneading dough, Dahlia turned to me. "What happens now?" I looked at her. "Legally?" She nodded. "The sheriff said Jonas is being held while the DA reviews the evidence. Patricia handed everything over. With the recordings, the background checks, and what you overheard, it's a strong case. There'll be charges, fraud, conspiracy, possibly elder abuse, depending on how they frame it." Dahlia swallowed. "He'll go to prison? Maybe. Or probation, restitution. Either way, he won't be back, and he won't be able to do this again, not with this on record." End quote. She looked down at the dough she was rolling out, her hands stilling. "Do I have to testify?" "If it comes to trial, probably, but we'll be ready, and you won't be alone." The silence stretched again, but this time it was steady, calm. Later, after breakfast, we sat on the porch. The morning sun had broken through the trees, casting everything in that golden Colorado glow. I handed Dahlia a mug of fresh coffee and sat beside her. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Not telling me about the money? About the land's real value?" I took a sip of coffee, thought carefully. "No," I said. "I don't regret protecting your childhood. I don't regret letting you grow up thinking we were just a little better than average. It gave you freedom, and when it mattered, it gave you strength." She leaned her head on my shoulder. I still feel stupid. You're not stupid, I said. You're kind and trusting, and those are not weaknesses. But now, they're tempered with experience. And that's a powerful thing. We watched the horizon together, silent for a long while. Then she said, "Thank you for saving me." I shook my head. "You saved yourself. I just caught you when you fell." The calls started around noon. Vendors, guests, curious friends from town. A cousin from Dallas I hadn't spoken to since David's funeral left a voicemail that said, "Ruth, I don't want to be nosy, but, well, you know how word travels." I knew, and I didn't blame them. You don't stop a wedding mid-vow, expose the groom as a con man, and expect people to keep it quiet. But I didn't answer most of them. Not yet. Some things deserved more care than gossip. Others could wait behind the walls of my home, where the air still smelled like bacon grease and fresh biscuits, where the windows faced out to the land I'd fought so hard to protect. Dahlia sat across from me in the living room, cradling a warm mug between her palms, still wearing the jeans and flannel shirt she'd changed into after the ceremony. Her hair was up, messy, and for the first time in weeks, she looked like herself, not the bride-to-be, not the career woman trying to make love look tidy, but my daughter. "I called work this morning," she said. "Told them I need a week." I nodded. "Good. They'll understand." She hesitated. "I also left a message with my therapist. I haven't seen her in a while, but I think I need to go back." "That's strength, not weakness," I said gently. "There's healing that can't happen on your own." She gave me a small smile. "You sound like Dad." I smiled too, but it pulled at something deep. He'd have had a lot to say about this mess. She laughed lightly. He'd have decked Jonas on sight. "He would have," I said, chuckling, and then quietly apologized to the sheriff afterward. "Infram." The humor helped. A little. It reminded us that we came from people who'd weathered worse storms, that our roots were deeper than any betrayal could reach. I stood and walked over to the sideboard, pulled out the manila folder Patricia had handed me 2 nights earlier. Inside were printed transcripts of the recorded conversations, the background reports, timelines, financial estimates. Dahlia watched me closely. "I want you to see it," I said. "Not because I want to punish you, but because you deserve the truth, all of it." She took the folder with both hands, and for the next half hour, silence returned to the room. Just the flipping of pages, her eyes scanning every word, every cold, strategic phrase Jonas had uttered when he thought no one was listening. When she reached the transcript of the conversation where he mentioned moving me into assisted living once she starts slipping, she exhaled hard and closed her eyes. "He never loved me," she said quietly. "No," I agreed. "He loved what he thought you could give him, which is different and crueler." She looked up at me. "I thought I was so careful." "I didn't fall fast. We took our time, at least I thought we did." "People like him don't need much time," I said. "They study people. They find your softest spot and nest there." She nodded slowly. "He found mine." Later, we sat on the porch again. Dahlia had brought out an old photo album from the living room shelf, one we hadn't opened in years. The leather cover was cracked, the corners curled. Inside were pictures of her as a toddler with dirt on her cheeks, a teenager with braces and crooked ponytails, a college graduate beaming in cap and gown, and David, always David, laughing in a flannel shirt, holding a baby lamb, arms around us both. "He would have seen right through Jonas," Dahlia said. "Maybe," I replied. "Or maybe he would have wanted to believe the best, like you did." She turned the page. "Did you ever almost marry the wrong person?" I smiled faintly. "Before your father, I nearly said yes to a man who thought teaching wasn't a real career, said I had potential for better things." "Wow," she muttered. I nodded. "Your father told me that educating people was the most radical form of hope. That's how I knew he saw me, not just what I could become." She was quiet for a moment. "I want that." "You will," I said. "But first you have to want yourself, fully, without apology. It's Manit." That night, we made dinner together. Just the 2 of us, chopped vegetables, grilled chicken, made cornbread with honey butter the way David used to. We talked about nothing heavy TV shows, old recipes, that time the rooster got loose and chased the mailman for 3 blocks. The next day, we met with the sheriff. Dahlia gave her official statement, clear-eyed and composed. She handed over the transcript Patricia had gathered, described what she overheard at the hotel, confirmed that Jonas had pushed for estate conversations from the beginning. The sheriff listened carefully, nodding as he jotted notes. "You're brave," he told her when she finished. "Most folks don't come forward until it's too late." Dahlia didn't reply. She didn't need to. Her presence said enough. Back home, I called Margaret and told her it was time to finalize the new documents, ones I'd been working on quietly for weeks. The trust was already in place, but I wanted it reinforced, unshakable, protected against any future Jonas types who might come sniffing around. And I wanted to make sure Dahlia knew without a shadow of doubt what she meant to me. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned that familiar peach blush of Colorado twilight, I handed her the papers. She looked at them, confused. "What's this?" "A copy of the trust," I said. "And a letter. From me." She opened the envelope slowly. Inside was my handwriting, a page torn from the same journal I'd been keeping since all this started. "Dahlia, no matter what you said, no matter what happened between us, you are still the child I waited my whole life for. This land will one day be yours, not because of your last name, not because you were born into it, but because you earned it. Not through perfection, but through the courage it takes to admit when you've been wrong, and the strength it takes to choose truth over comfort. Love." "Mom." She didn't say a word, just folded the letter back up with trembling fingers and leaned into me on the porch bench. The stars came out one by one. We watched them together. The following morning, Dahlia rose before I did. I found her outside, boots on her feet, hair tied back in a loose braid, standing by the old chicken coop behind the barn. She held a small tin of feed in one hand and was tossing seed into the dirt with the other, speaking in soft tones to the hens who clucked and waddled their way toward her. For a moment, I just watched. That image, my daughter, sun spilling over her shoulders, boots dusty, surrounded by the little creatures that once terrified her, was one I hadn't expected to see again. But there she was, grounded, quiet, reclaiming something she hadn't even known she'd lost. I walked out to her slowly, the dewy grass brushing the cuffs of my pants. "Didn't think I'd see you back out here," I said gently. She turned to me with a small smile. "I woke up and, I don't know, I just needed to move. Good instinct." She looked back at the chickens. "I forgot how peaceful this part of the ranch is. It's always been here, hasn't it? All these years." "It has," I said. "And it always will be, so long as we remember to care for it." We stood side by side for a while, not talking, just listening to the rustle of wind through the cottonwoods and the soft clucking of hens. The mountains loomed gently in the distance, familiar and reassuring. After breakfast, we drove into town. There were errands to run groceries, a stop at the post office, a meeting with Margaret at her law office, but mostly, I think we needed to show our faces again. Small towns remember everything, and while nobody had called us names or thrown stones, we both knew the looks would come. And they did. Not cruel ones, just the curious, sidelong glances of people who had heard something big and messy and weren't quite sure how to address it. At the market, Mrs. Delaney from the school board approached me near the canned goods aisle. "Ruth," she said softly. We were all so shocked. "Are you two all right?" I smiled politely. "We are, and thank you for asking." She hesitated. "Some of us, we suspected something was off about him, but, well, he was charming." "They usually are," I said. "That's how they get in." Back in the car, Dahlia buckled her seatbelt and stared out the windshield. "I don't want to be a cautionary tale," she murmured. "You're not," I replied. "You're a story of survival." At Margaret's office, we signed the final revisions of the trust documents. Dahlia read every word this time. She asked questions, clarified terms. She didn't defer to me or nod blindly, and when she finished signing, she sat back in her chair and exhaled slowly. "I feel different," she said. "You are," Margaret replied. "Experience does that, especially when it hurts." Back at the ranch, we unloaded groceries and settled into a quiet afternoon. I baked a fresh peach cobbler, David's favorite, and Dahlia helped slice the fruit, laughing when the juice ran down her wrist. "Do you remember when Dad tried to make a cobbler by himself?" she asked. "He put salt instead of sugar," I said, chuckling, "and insisted it was just rustic. We laughed harder than we had in days. That night, as twilight bled across the sky, Dahlia asked if we could sit by the garden bench, the one with David's name carved into the stone. I nodded, and we brought 2 mugs of tea with us, wrapped shawls around our shoulders, and made our way down the dirt path. The roses were in full bloom, wild and fragrant. Their scent hung heavy in the air, and for a moment it felt like he was there with us. "I feel like I failed him," Dahlia said softly, her fingers brushing the name etched into granite. "Dad, you, everyone. You didn't fail anyone," I said. "You walked into something with love. That's never failure. It just wasn't seen clearly. But now you see, that's the gift." She leaned against me. "Will I ever trust myself again?" "You already are," I said. "You're sitting here. You came home. You're choosing healing over shame. That's the hardest trust to rebuild." We sat in silence for a long while. Then she asked something I hadn't expected. "Can I stay for a while? Not just a few days. A few months, maybe longer. I want to help you with the ranch. Learn how to run things. I need to feel useful. I need to feel rooted again." I looked at her, my throat tightening. "This place was always yours," I said, "and it always will be. Stay as long as you want." The stars began to appear, one by one. She reached out and took my hand again. And there, in the scent of roses and the hush of night, we started something new, not just recovery, but renewal. Not just safety, but strength. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm I hadn't known I missed. Dahlia stayed. True to her word, she rolled up her sleeves and got to work mucking out stalls, helping with the books, riding the property lines with me each morning. She asked questions, took notes, made mistakes, laughed at herself. Slowly, the rawness in her eyes gave way to something steadier, grounded. We didn't talk about Jonas much. The sheriff called twice to update us he was being held pending charges, and Marcus had agreed to cooperate in exchange for leniency. There would be a hearing soon. Dahlia would likely be called to testify. But that was still a few weeks off, and until then, we had fences to mend, calves to tag, and a property that demanded constant, devoted care. One morning, while we were hauling hay to the southern paddock, Dahlia paused and looked out over the land. "How did you keep all this going after Dad died?" she asked. I wiped my brow with the back of my glove, one chore at a time. She nodded, thoughtful. "I never realized how much he did out here. Thanks for watching. You were young, and David made it look easy. But it wasn't. It never is." She looked down at her boots, then back at me. "I'm sorry I didn't ask sooner. About how you were doing. About what this place meant to you." "I didn't always know how to say it," I admitted. There were days I felt like I was just holding it all together with baling wire and prayer. "And now?" I smiled. "Now I have help." We loaded the last bale and climbed into the old truck. The engine sputtered to life with its familiar grumble, and as we bounced down the dirt path back toward the house, Dahlia turned to me. "Do you think I can do it?" she asked. "Really take care of this place someday?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at her sweat on her brow, dirt under her nails, her posture looser than it had been in years, and thought of all the ways she'd changed. "You already are," I said. That night, as we sat in the den watching old home movies, David chasing a toddler Dahlia with a garden hose, her squealing with laughter, I noticed something new in her laughter. It wasn't the brittle, polite laugh she'd used with Jonas. It was full-bodied, unguarded. True. Later, as I tucked the old tapes back into their box, she lingered in the doorway. "I want to rebuild the greenhouse," she said, "the one that collapsed during the blizzard 2 years ago." I raised an eyebrow. "That's a big project." "I know, but it's something I always loved, growing things. I used to help you in there when I was little. You also knocked over 3 trays of seedlings and cried for an hour." She laughed. "I was 5. You're forgiven." She stepped further into the room. "I think it could be good for me. Something to build from the ground up. Something that doesn't remind me of him." I nodded slowly. "Then let's do it." End quote. The next morning, we drove into town for lumber and supplies. At the hardware store, old Mr. Whitaker behind the counter squinted at us. "Well, I'll be," he said. "Miss Caldwell, back on the ranch, are you?" "Helping Mom rebuild the greenhouse," Dahlia said proudly. He gave a low whistle. "That place used to be the talk of the county back in the day. Tomatoes in December. Give us a few weeks," she grinned. We'll bring it back." In the truck on the way home, she was quiet for a while. Then she said, "It feels good. Earning back trust, even mine." I glanced over. Trust isn't given. It's grown, like anything that lasts. The greenhouse frame went up slowly. We spent our afternoons hammering, sawing, measuring, laughing at our mistakes. It was hard work, but it was different than the labor of the ranch. This wasn't about maintenance, it was about creation. About planting something new. We painted the wooden frame soft sage green, the same color it used to be. She found an old photo of David and me standing in front of the original greenhouse, and we pinned it up inside as a tribute. "This place is full of ghosts," she said one evening, wiping sweat from her brow. "Good ghosts," I replied. "Ones that remind us who we are." We installed the glass panels the following week, one by one. Each time the sun hit them just right, the whole structure lit up like a beacon. And when it was finished, we stood inside together, breathing in the scent of wood and soil and possibility. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's yours," I said. She turned to me. "No, it's ours." In that moment, under the soft light filtering through the glass, I realized something. We hadn't just survived a betrayal. We had reclaimed something that could never be bought or stolen: our bond, our purpose, our home. The morning of the hearing dawned colder than usual for early fall. Dahlia stood at the edge of the porch, her breath curling in the air, a mug of black coffee cupped between her hands. She was dressed simply black slacks, a soft blue blouse, her hair pulled back in a low bun. No makeup, no jewelry, no armor other than her own resolve. I stepped out beside her, zipping up my coat. "You don't have to do this," I said gently. "You've already done more than enough." She didn't take her eyes off the horizon. "I do, Mom. For me. For every woman who's ever been fooled by a pretty smile and a practiced lie." We drove to the courthouse in near silence. The road wound through familiar stretches, past the diner where David used to buy me pancakes every Sunday after church, past the elementary school where I'd worked for 20 years. These places were the bones of our lives. Jonas had tried to hollow us out from the inside, but he hadn't known how deep our roots went. At the courthouse, we were met by Sheriff Dawson and Patricia. Dahlia straightened her shoulders as she stepped out of the car, her heels clicking on the pavement like a drumbeat. Inside, the room was small and spare. No grand jury, no crowd, just a preliminary hearing to decide whether the evidence was sufficient to proceed with formal charges. Jonas sat at the defendant's table, clean-shaven, dressed in a modest gray suit that screamed cooperation. His attorney, a slick young man with 2 white teeth, whispered something to him as we entered. Jonas looked at Dahlia. She didn't flinch. He gave her a small, almost apologetic smile. She stared back, expressionless. The judge entered. The bailiff called the room to order. The proceedings began. The prosecutor, an older woman named Miss Breyer, laid out the case calmly, efficiently. She introduced the recorded conversations, described Jonas's history of short-term engagements to women with assets, explained the planned transfer of property and power of attorney. Then Dahlia was called to testify. She walked to the stand with quiet strength, took her oath, and sat down. "Miss Caldwell," the prosecutor began, "can you tell us how you came to be engaged to the defendant?" Dahlia took a breath. "We met at a charity auction. He was charming, thoughtful. He asked about my work, remembered details. We dated for nearly a year before he proposed." "Did he ever express interest in your family's financial situation?" "At first, he just asked general questions. Later, more specific about land ownership, estate planning, my mother's health." "And what did you believe his intentions were at the time?" She looked straight ahead. "I believed he loved me." There was a pause. "And when did that belief change?" "The night before our wedding. I went to his hotel to retrieve something I'd left. I overheard him speaking on the phone about my mother, about me, about the trust. He referred to my mom as already halfway out the door. He said once we were married, he'd have control." Her voice remained even, though her fingers trembled slightly on her lap. "Did you confront him?" "No," I panicked. "I wrote a note and passed it to my mother during the ceremony." "Did you believe you were in danger?" Dahlia nodded. I didn't know what he was capable of, but I knew I had to get out. The defense attorney stood, buttoning his blazer. "Miss Caldwell, are you aware that no physical harm was ever attempted or threatened by my client?" "Yes, And that your mother hired a private investigator to follow him? Yes. Would you say your mother influenced your perception of Mr. Whitaker? Dahlia didn't blink. She warned me. I didn't listen. That was my mistake. But I made my decision based on what I heard with my own ears. He nodded, scribbled something in his notes, then sat down. Jonas never looked up. After her testimony, Dahlia stepped down and returned to her seat beside me. I reached over and squeezed her hand. She squeezed back. The judge reviewed the evidence and ruled that the case would proceed to trial. Bail was denied. As we stood to leave, Jonas looked over at us one last time. This time, there was no smirk, no pretense, just a flicker of something that might have been regret or maybe just the shock of losing a game he thought he'd already won. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. We stepped into the light, both of us quiet for a while. Then Dahlia said, "I thought it would feel better than this." "It's not supposed to feel good," I replied. "It's just supposed to feel honest." We drove home in silence, letting the weight of the morning settle behind us. That afternoon, Dahlia walked out to the greenhouse alone. Later, I found her there, kneeling beside the first tray of new seedlings. Tiny green shoots poked through the soil. New beginnings. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Some justice comes in courtrooms, but some of it grows quietly, one seed at a time. Autumn settled in slowly that year. The trees turned in waves, first the aspens on the southern ridge, then the oaks along the stream, and finally the stubborn maples near the driveway that always held on longer than they should. The mornings grew crisp, the air filled with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. Life on the ranch adjusted accordingly. Chores started later, ended earlier, and sweaters became as essential as boots. Dahlia and I fell into a quiet rhythm. After the hearing, something in her shifted. Not just the weight of the legal process, but a deeper understanding of who she was becoming. She didn't talk about Jonas much, and I didn't push her to. His name had no place in our days anymore. The court would handle the rest, and we had work to do. One afternoon, I found her in the greenhouse, her hands buried in the soil, eyes closed, lips moving silently. "What are you doing?" I asked gently. She opened her eyes and looked up with a small smile. "Talking to the basil." "Speakered." I raised an eyebrow. She shrugged. "Dad used to say the plants could feel your intentions, that if you wanted something to grow, you had to mean it. He also talked to the hummingbirds like they were bar patrons. He was eccentric. And possibly magical." I laughed, stepping inside, the glass warm with sunlight. The space was filling in beautifully rows of herbs, young vegetables, flowers just beginning to stretch toward the sky. It smelled of promise. "I was thinking," she said, brushing dirt from her fingers, "about starting a small farm stand, just at the end of the drive. Herbs, tomatoes, maybe cut flowers in the spring." I looked at her, surprised. "It's small," she said quickly. "Just something for me. Not the whole ranch, I know. But—" I stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I think it's perfect." Her eyes lit up. "Really?" "Really. This land has always been about more than cattle and fences. It's about growing, healing. You've found your piece of that." She smiled, a quiet, confident smile I hadn't seen in her since before everything went sideways. And in that moment, I realized she was no longer just recovering. She was blooming. That weekend, we drove into town for the Harvest Festival. We hadn't gone in years, not since David passed, but Dahlia wanted to go, and I wasn't about to let her go alone. Main Street was blocked off, booths lining the sidewalks, kids running around with cider and caramel apples. The town band played from the gazebo. It was the same as I remembered, only more crowded. As we walked past a row of craft stalls, I noticed people watching us. Not unkindly, just aware. Their looks held something different now, not pity, not judgment, but a kind of respect. Mrs. Larkin from the bank waved us over, handed Dahlia a cup of hot cider. "Heard about the hearing," she said softly. "Takes a lot of guts, what you did." Dahlia thanked her, her voice steady. No shrinking, no shame. Later, we ran into the mayor, who shook Dahlia's hand and said, "You know, if you ever want to get involved in the community garden committee, we could use someone like you." Dahlia's eyebrows rose. "I'd love that." We walked back to the truck with small bags of cinnamon nuts and fresh apples. The sky was streaked with orange and lavender, and for the first time in a long while, I saw my daughter walking like someone who belonged again not just to the world, but to herself. As we drove home, she said, "It's weird. I thought everyone would be whispering about me. They probably did, but not for the reason you think." She glanced at me. "They're not whispering because you were tricked," I said. "They're whispering because you stood up. That's what people remember, not the fall, the rise." Back home, we unloaded our goods and made apple pie together. The smell filled the house, warm and spiced, like memory. As we worked, Dahlia paused. "Do you think I'll ever love again?" she asked, not looking up. I took a long moment before answering. "Yes," I said, "but not the way you did before. You'll love with your eyes open, with your heart wiser. And that kind of love, it's slower, steadier. But when it comes, it lasts." She nodded slowly. "Do you still miss him?" she asked quietly. "Dad? Every day," I said. "But now, when I think of him, I smile first." That took time. That night, after pie and tea and a little music playing from the old radio in the kitchen, Dahlia went to bed early. I stayed up, watching the fire crackle in the hearth. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering leaves across the porch. Inside, the silence felt full, not empty, but complete. And I thought, healing doesn't come all at once. It arrives in moments, in seedlings, in cider and laughter, in hot apple pie and unexpected invitations, in a daughter asking hard questions, and a mother learning when to answer and when to simply listen. We were getting there, together. By November, the frost came early. Each morning, we woke to windows laced with delicate ice patterns and the crisp smell of wood smoke curling from the chimney. The earth stiffened beneath our boots, and the animals grew more restless, sensing the change. The ranch always felt quieter in winter, as if nature itself was drawing inward to heal. Dahlia had taken to rising earlier than me, even which was saying something. I'd come downstairs to find her bundled in David's old flannel, reading seed catalogs at the kitchen table, scribbling notes in a leather-bound journal. She had filled the greenhouse with winter crops, lettuces, radishes, hardy herbs, and had even rigged a small heater to keep the soil from freezing. I watched her through the glass sometimes, bent over her work with purpose and care. There was peace in her now, not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that blooms after survival. One chilly morning, she came in from the garden with a bundle of fresh parsley and a flyer in her hand. "They're doing a fundraiser next week," she said, dropping the herbs in the sink, "for the women's shelter in town." I looked at the paper. A silent auction? Yeah, they're asking for donations, handmade stuff, baked goods, things like that. I nodded. "What are you thinking?" She hesitated. "I'd like to donate herb baskets, maybe a few jars of dried tea blends, something small." "I think that's a beautiful idea." She gave a small smile. "I was also thinking of offering a workshop, just a little session on winter gardening, nothing fancy, just sharing what I've learned." I turned from the sink and looked at her. "That's more than a donation. That's leadership." She shrugged, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of pride. "I just want to help." The week flew by. We packaged herbs into neat bundles, wrapped them with twine and tags, and filled glass jars with her tea blends, peppermint, chamomile, lemon balm. She added handwritten notes to each one, little messages like, "May this cup bring you peace." It was her way of giving back without grandstanding. On the day of the fundraiser, we dressed warmly and headed into town with our boxes in the truck bed. The community center was bustling tables full of pies, quilts, paintings, jars of jam, and knitted scarves. The scent of cinnamon and vanilla hung thick in the air. People greeted us with nods, smiles, kind words. "Dahlia, I've been meaning to thank you," one woman said, clasping her hand. "What you did standing up like that, it meant a lot to more women than you know." Asked. Dahlia's cheeks flushed. "Thank you," she murmured. We set up her table near the windows. It was simple but elegant fresh greens, labeled jars, a small sign that read, "From root to rise." Before long, people started stopping by, asking questions, complimenting the blends. She talked about soil, light, the importance of patience. I stood nearby, watching her transform from survivor to teacher. Later, as I browsed the other booths, I overheard two women whispering near a quilt display. "That's her, isn't it? The one who exposed that man at her own wedding." "Yes, but she's stronger for it. She saved herself." And I smiled. That evening, after we returned home and unpacked the empty boxes, Dahlia made tea for both of us. We sat by the fire, our mugs warm in our hands, the wind howling gently outside. "I think I'm starting to understand," she said suddenly. I looked over. "What?" I asked. "Why you never sold the ranch. Even after Dad died, even when it was hard." End quote. I nodded slowly. "It's not just land, it's memory, it's purpose, it's home." She took a sip of tea, then leaned her head back against the couch. "I used to think home was where you were safe," she said. "Now I think it's where you get to be whole, even after the breaking." I reached over and took her hand. "You're home now," I said softly. She didn't reply. She didn't have to. The fire crackled, the tea warmed our bones, and in the silence that followed, I felt something settle in me, something that had been restless for far too long. Contentment. Thanksgiving came quietly that year, without fanfare or fuss. We didn't send out invitations or host a large gathering. It was just the two of us, and that was enough. After everything that had happened, the idea of cooking for 100 people or making small talk over cranberry sauce felt hollow. What we needed was something simpler, something real. We began the morning like any other chores. Coffee, a little music playing softly in the kitchen. Dahlia pulled out David's old recipe cards from the tin he'd kept above the stove, most of them yellowed and smudged with years of use. "He always added too much sage," she said, grinning as she flipped through them. "And never admitted it," I added, laughing. "Said it was flavor-forward. Ask Lay." We cooked side by side all morning. Turkey, stuffing, sweet potatoes, cornbread, and his infamous sage gravy. She insisted on making the cranberry relish from scratch, even though I told her the canned version had its charm. Around noon, I took out the box of photo albums from the hallway closet. "Let's eat by the fire," I said. "We'll tell stories while we eat, just us." So we did. We set the coffee table with our plates, lit a few candles, and wrapped ourselves in thick blankets. The wood stove crackled nearby, and the warmth of food, memory, and the flickering flame made the room feel like a sanctuary. I opened one of the albums and pointed to a picture of Dahlia on a tricycle, helmet askew, beaming with pride. "You had just learned to ride down the driveway without crashing," I said. "We must have celebrated like it was the Olympics." "I remember the scrape I got when I didn't stop in time and ran into the chicken coop," she said. "You screamed like you'd lost a limb." "I thought I had." We laughed until our sides hurt, tears in our eyes not from pain, but from joy. The kind of joy that sneaks up on you after sorrow has stretched you out so wide you think you'll never feel full again. Later that afternoon, as we washed dishes, Dahlia turned to me, soap suds on her hands. "Do you think people change?" I looked at her carefully. "I think they do, but only when they face the truth and stay with it long enough to grow. Actually have depend." She nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about starting a support group for women like me, women who were manipulated, lied to, who thought they were crazy for asking questions." I dried a plate and set it aside. "That's a powerful idea. I just don't want what happened to me to be the end of the story. If there's one good thing I can do with it, maybe it'll mean something." I put down the dish towel. "You already did something good. You stopped it. You spoke out. But if you want to go further, I'll help however I can." She smiled at me. "Thank you." The next day, we drafted a flyer, "Rooted Women," a support circle for those healing from betrayal, gaslighting, or emotional manipulation. The name was hers. She said it reminded her that the strongest plants are the ones you can't see growing because they're digging deeper, anchoring themselves. We placed copies around town at the library, the market, the women's shelter, and the church bulletin board. The response surprised both of us. By the end of the week, 5 women had signed up. "I thought it would take months," she whispered, reading the names aloud. "Truth has gravity," I said. "When one person speaks it, others feel less alone." The first meeting was held at our home, in the greenhouse, of all places. Chairs were arranged in a circle, a pot of herbal tea simmering on a side table, candles flickering against the glass. The women came slowly, cautiously, each of them carrying stories in their eyes. One had left a fiancé who drained her accounts. Another had been isolated from her family for years by a manipulative husband. One had never spoken of it out loud until that night. Dahlia didn't preach. She listened, asked questions, shared pieces of her own story, but never made it about her. And in that space, warm, green, safe, something sacred happened. Women cried, laughed, sat in silence when words were too much, and when the evening ended, they hugged each other like sisters reunited after a long winter. As we cleaned up, Dahlia wiped down a chair and said, "I didn't know how much I needed that too." I nodded. "You gave them something real, and they gave it right back." That night, I journaled by the fire, the house still and quiet. "Healing isn't loud," I wrote. "It's a whisper, a planting, a shared breath in the greenhouse." Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall soft, steady, covering everything like forgiveness. The snow didn't stop for 3 days. It came down in thick, slow flakes, blanketing the ranch in silence. Fences disappeared beneath drifts. The horses huddled in the barn, their breath rising like smoke. The greenhouse stood like a glowing lantern against the white, warm, and alive in a world gone quiet. Dahlia and I moved through those days like clockwork, shoveling paths, feeding animals, checking insulation, layering in extra hay, the kind of labor that keeps you honest. We didn't talk much about Jonas or the upcoming trial. We didn't need to. There was comfort in motion, in doing what needed to be done. One evening, after we came in from clearing the porch, Dahlia pulled a weathered box from the hall closet. "What's that?" I asked, hanging up my coat. She brushed snow off the lid. "Letters. From Dad. From when he was away for training, back before I was born." I hadn't seen that box in years. David had written to me every other day the first year we were married, his handwriting neat and blocky, his words so full of heart it hurt sometimes to read them. We sat on the living room floor and opened the box, laying the letters out like old treasures. She read one aloud. His words were simple, but they glowed. "If this land fails, I'll start again. If the house falls, I'll build it back. But if I lose you, Ruth, I lose the whole damn world." Dahlia's voice broke at the end. "He really loved you," she whispered. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "And he would have loved you through this, no questions asked." She looked up. "I think he'd be proud of me. Of us." "He would," I said, "more than words." She reached into the box again and pulled out a folded envelope. "This one's to me." It was dated the day she was born. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. I watched her eyes move across the page. "My Dahlia, you won't read this for a long time, but I want you to know something while the world is still new to you. You were born into love, into land, into legacy. Don't let anyone ever tell you your worth is tied to a man, a marriage, or money. You are your own light, and I'll be shining with you, every step, even when I'm gone." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I wish he was here." End quote. "He is," I said, pressing her hand. We spent the rest of the night reading his words, wrapped in blankets, the storm howling outside. It felt like he had left us a map, reminders of who we were and what we stood for. The next morning, we woke to a world washed clean. Sunlight bounced off the snow in every direction. The trees sparkled with ice. It was the kind of beauty that stops you in your tracks. Dahlia pulled on boots and gloves and ran outside like a child, arms outstretched, twirling in the fresh snow. I watched her from the window, smiling. Later, she came back in, cheeks flushed, and said, "We should build something." I raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "A bench, out by the trail, with a plaque for Dad, and one for you, and someday, one for me. A place people can rest, a place rooted in something real." I took her face in my hands. "Let's do it. It's very Pruvitz." The following week, we started gathering materials, reclaimed wood from the barn, stones from the creek bed, a metal worker in town who offered to help with the plaques. Word spread fast. People started dropping off things, bolts, varnish, even homemade cookies for our project days. One afternoon, Mrs. Landry from church stopped by with a casserole and tears in her eyes. "My daughter went through something like you did," she told Dahlia quietly, "but she never talked about it. What you're doing, it matters." Dahlia hugged her without hesitation. The bench took 3 weeks. We installed it just off the main trail, near a clearing that overlooked the western ridge. The view stretched for miles, fields, fences, the rise of mountains in the distance. We bolted the plaques into place. David's read, Builder, Father, Dreamer. Mine, Protector, Truth-teller, Survivor. And Dahlia's, Rooted, Rising, Unbreakable. We stood back and let the wind move through us. People came by that weekend, Saturday read, cried, hugged us. And in that quiet place, the story of our pain became something else entirely. A legacy. The invitation came in the mail on a Thursday. It was plain, white, with embossed lettering and a Denver courthouse return address. Dahlia stared at it for a long time before opening it, her thumb resting on the seal like it might bite. I sat across from her at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, watching her shoulders rise and fall with a long breath. "It's the trial," she finally said. "They've set the date." I didn't say anything right away, just waited. She unfolded the letter. "Preliminary testimonies begin in 3 weeks. They want me to speak." Again. "You don't have to decide now," I said. She nodded, folding the paper back up, hands trembling just slightly. "I want to do it. I do. But I'm scared. I know the idea." "Of what?" "Of reliving it, of seeing him again, of stumbling on my words. What if I freeze? What if I forget something important?" I reached across the table and laid my hand over hers. "Then you breathe, and speak from the truth. That's all the court really needs." She looked up at me. "Will you be there?" "I'll be in the front row." That night, Dahlia stayed up late in the greenhouse. I watched her from the back porch, just a shadow behind the glass, pacing, occasionally stopping to write in her journal. I didn't interrupt. She needed the solitude. The next morning, she woke early and made us breakfast. Real breakfast, like she hadn't in weeks. Eggs, biscuits, bacon, and coffee brewed so strong it could have stood up on its own. "Today," she said between bites, "I'm going to practice." "Practice what?" "Telling the truth. Like it's a story, not a trauma." I smiled. "That's the beginning of power." We turned the living room into a mock courtroom. I played the judge, then the prosecutor, then the defense attorney. Dahlia stood in the middle, shoulders squared, eyes locked ahead. At first, her voice shook. She stumbled on phrases, fidgeted with her hands. But by the end of the day, she was steady, poised. She told the truth not as a victim, but as a witness. A few days later, we went shopping for a new outfit for court. Something professional, strong, simple. "Dark blue," I said, pulling a blazer from the rack. "Trustworthy, quietly commanding." She smirked. "You sound like a campaign manager. You're campaigning for your own justice. Dress the part." As we walked to the register, we passed a mirror. Dahlia paused, looked at herself, really looked, her chin lifted. "I almost don't recognize this version of me," she said. "That's because she's still unfolding," I said. Back at the ranch, we spent the weekend cleaning out the attic. It was something we'd put off for years. Dust, forgotten boxes, old tax records, Christmas decorations, broken ornaments wrapped in newspaper from 2002. And in one corner, an old wooden chest I hadn't opened since David passed. Inside, letters, receipts, a cassette tape labeled, "For Ruth, when you need it most." I stared at it for a moment. "You okay?" Dahlia asked. I handed her the tape. "Let's find out." Axed. We dusted off the cassette player from the closet and popped it in. David's voice crackled through the speakers, warm, worn, familiar. "Hey, love, if you're listening to this, it means you've hit one of those storms we used to talk about. Maybe I'm not there to help this time, but I want you to remember something. You were never meant to be fragile. You bend, you stretch, but you don't break. You were the roots that held this family together, and no matter what comes next, I believe in you. Still. Always." The tape ended with a soft breath. A pause, then silence. Dahlia wiped her eyes. "He made this for you?" "He knew me better than I knew myself sometimes." She reached for my hand. "He knew me too." The next morning, Dahlia stood on the porch, her coat zipped to the chin, her bag in one hand. "Denver?" I asked. She nodded. "Patricia said the DA wants to meet. Final prep." I stepped forward, wrapping my arms around her. "You've already won, baby. Everything from here is just the echo." She smiled. eyes damp. Still. Walk me to the truck? We walked slowly. Snow crunched underfoot. When she turned the key, the engine rumbled to life. She rolled down the window. I'll call when I'm settled. Text me when you stop for gas. And no speeding. Yes, Mom. She pulled away, waving once before turning down the road, the truck disappearing into the trees. I stood there long after she was gone, watching the snow fall again. Not heavy this time. Just soft. Like grace. The courthouse in Denver was gray and imposing, its cold marble hallways echoing with the shuffle of lawyers, clerks, and cautious footsteps. Dahlia sat in a small waiting room outside the courtroom, the sleeves of her blazer pulled tight around her wrists, her hands clasped in her lap. She looked like a statue of poise still, composed, but I knew better. I knew the storm that could swirl inside her, quiet but relentless. I sat beside her, our shoulders barely touching. You don't have to say anything until they ask, I reminded her gently. Let the questions guide you. She nodded, eyes fixed ahead. I've practiced. I know you have. The door opened. A court officer stepped in. Miss Caldwell, they're ready for you. She stood, slow but certain. I rose with her, my hand brushing hers. I'll be right behind you. She didn't speak, just nodded and followed the officer through the door. The courtroom wasn't large, but it felt cavernous. Jonas sat at the defense table in another gray suit, clean-shaven again, hair parted neatly. He looked smaller than I remembered, shrunken, perhaps by consequence. He didn't look at Dahlia when she entered. He stared straight ahead. The judge asked Dahlia to take the stand. She walked with purpose, took her oath with clarity, and sat, her spine straight as a fence post. The prosecutor, Miss Breyer, approached first. Ms. Caldwell, thank you for being here today. I know this isn't easy. It's not, Dahlia said, but it's necessary. Her voice rang clear across the room. What made you first suspect that something wasn't right in your relationship with Mr. Whitaker? She didn't pause. The night before our wedding, I overheard him on the phone. He was talking about my mother like she was a problem to be removed. He said once we were married, he'd take control of the estate. He laughed. It was like I wasn't even a person, just a bridge to someone else's money. And how did that make you feel? Horrified, used, stupid, but mostly afraid. Did you confront him? No. I panicked. I wrote a note and handed it to my mother during the ceremony. I knew she'd know what to do. There was a murmur in the gallery. The judge raised a hand. Order, the prosecutor continued. And what happened after that? She stood up, she exposed him, and she saved me. Next came the defense. Jonas's attorney, slick as ever, approached with his trademark smirk barely concealed. Miss Caldwell, you said you panicked. Do you think it's possible you misinterpreted what you heard, that perhaps you were emotional? Dahlia met his eyes. I wasn't emotional. I was alert. I knew what I heard. And I wasn't the only one who'd grown suspicious. There was a private investigator involved, and the recordings don't lie. He shifted tactics. You also stood to gain from this accusation, didn't you? By canceling the wedding, you protected your inheritance. I wasn't thinking about money, she said coldly. I was thinking about surviving. The courtroom went still. Jonas shifted in his seat, the first visible crack in his demeanor. The attorney retreated, murmuring, No further questions. The judge looked at Dahlia. You may step down. She walked back to her seat with dignity so palpable it seemed to press against the walls. That evening, after court adjourned, we sat in a nearby diner, drinking lukewarm coffee under flickering fluorescent lights. Dahlia stared out the window at the snow-dusted sidewalk, her expression unreadable. How do you feel? I asked. Empty, she said softly, and weirdly proud. You were brilliant, she gave a tired smile. He didn't even look at me once. Because he couldn't. We stayed the night in a small inn near the courthouse. Dahlia went to bed early, exhausted in the way only emotional labor can make you. I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker through bare branches, and thought about how far we'd come, not just from betrayal, but from silence. In the morning, Dahlia came downstairs wearing jeans and a heavy coat, her hair tied back in a simple ponytail. I want to go home, she said. We did. Back at the ranch, the snow was melting. The fields were soft and muddy, but the greenhouse glowed in the late morning sun. We walked out to the trail where the bench stood. The plaques gleamed in the light. She sat down, breathing deep. "I left him behind," she said, "in that courtroom. For good." I nodded. "And now?" She turned to me, a smile tugging at her lips. "Now I build something better." Spring came early that year, not in the usual slow crawl of melted snow and cautious buds, but all at once, like the earth had decided it was done with mourning. The fields turned green almost overnight. Birds returned, loud and full of plans. The wind was warmer, kinder, and in the middle of it all, Dahlia stood in the greenhouse, hands in the dirt, humming to herself. The trial had concluded the week before. Jonas pled guilty to attempted fraud and conspiracy to commit elder exploitation. He took a deal: 3 years probation, restitution, and mandatory counseling. No jail time, but a record that would follow him forever. Dahlia didn't attend the sentencing. "I don't need to see the end," she told me. "I'm already living my beginning." And she meant it. Every day, she threw herself deeper into the work of healing not just herself, but others. The Rooted Women's Support Group met weekly now, out in the greenhouse, under the soft hum of grow lights and surrounded by green things refusing to die. Women brought tea, stories, sometimes silence. Dahlia listened, guided, shared when it felt right, and then returned to her soil, her seeds, her sanctuary. One afternoon, I stood in the kitchen, looking out the window while she loaded potted herbs into her truck. She was headed to the Saturday market in town, her first booth. There were jars of dried basil, bundles of rosemary tied with twine, and hand-labeled tea bags in little wooden crates. On the back of each tag she'd written, "From the soil we rise, from truth we bloom." Before she drove off, I walked outside and handed her a small box. "What's this?" she asked. "A little something for your stand." She opened it to find a sign I had carved from cedar. Burned into the grain were the words, "Dahlia Caldwell, healer, grower, survivor." Her eyes welled up. "Mom, you earned it." At the market, people stopped often. Not just to buy herbs, but to talk, to ask questions, to tell their own stories in quiet voices over the scent of mint and marjoram. Later that evening, she came home glowing. "I didn't know how much I needed that," she said, unpacking the few unsold bundles. "Not just the selling, but the connecting." "Service is healing," I said. "It keeps your hands busy and your heart open." Tenture. That night, as we sat on the porch watching fireflies blink across the field, Dahlia turned to me. "I've been thinking," she said slowly, "about starting something bigger." I looked at her. "A retreat," she continued, "for women like me, like us, survivors, a place to learn, rest, rebuild, garden therapy, workshops, cooking, storytelling, something rooted." I didn't answer right away. Just looked out at the land, the same land David and I had once walked in silence, dreaming of a life we hadn't yet built. "It's a beautiful idea," I finally said, "and this place, it's ready." She leaned against my shoulder, quiet for a long time. "Do you think people will come?" I wrapped my arm around her. "They're already coming. You're just making a place for them to stay." Over the next few weeks, the dream began to take shape. We cleared the east pasture, marked off space for a yurt or two, maybe a small bunkhouse. Dahlia reached out to therapists, local artists, farmers. The name came to her one morning over coffee. The Rooted Way. A path, a place, a promise. She filed the paperwork, started designing a logo. I watched her, sometimes in awe, always in admiration. "You've become your own storm," I told her one day. She looked up, puzzled. "Not the kind that destroys," I explained. "The kind that changes the air. That brings rain to dry soil." She smiled. "Maybe that's what healing really is, becoming what you needed when you were broken." And just like that, I saw her fully no longer the daughter I had saved, but the woman she had become. And she was magnificent. The retreat opened in mid-June. We didn't hold a grand opening or ribbon cutting. That wasn't the style of the Rooted Way. Instead, it began as all true healing does, quietly, with intention. 6 women came that first weekend. Some drove in from nearby towns, others flew in from other states, different ages, backgrounds, accents, but all carried something heavy behind their eyes, the kind of weight no one else sees unless they've carried it too. Dahlia welcomed each one personally, standing barefoot near the garden gate, her hands dusty, her voice calm and sure. "Welcome home," she said to each of them. "You're safe here." Graded in quote. They slept in canvas tents with lavender sachets tucked into the pillows. They ate fresh bread and herbs from the greenhouse, drank tea in the morning sun. They walked the trails in silence, then returned in the evening to sit around the fire, where they spoke not always in words, but in the simple act of being seen. On the third night, one of the women, a widow from Minnesota, stood by the fire and whispered, "I haven't felt safe enough to sleep through the night in years. Last night I did." And agreed. Dahlia's eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. She just nodded and said, "Then we're doing something right." I helped in the background, laundry, cooking, chopping wood. I didn't attend the sessions, didn't need to. This was Dahlia's calling. Mine had been raising her, protecting her. Now, I simply bore witness to her becoming. One morning, I brought fresh pastries to the communal kitchen and found a note on the table. It was folded in half, addressed to me. "Mom, I don't say it enough, but this would not exist without you. Your strength, your stories, your stubbornness, every seed I plant, I owe to the soil you gave me. Thank you for never letting go, even when I tried to push you away. Love always, Dahlia." I read it 3 times before folding it carefully and tucking it into my pocket. The second weekend brought 8 more women. By the 3rd month, there was a waiting list. Therapists started referring patients. Local businesses donated supplies. A woman from Santa Fe offered to build a labyrinth on the lower ridge, a walking meditation path for release and clarity. Every Sunday, Dahlia hosted a closing circle for the week's group. She lit a candle, passed a small stone from hand to hand, and invited each woman to speak one word for what they were taking with them. Peace, one would say. Courage. Voice. Worth. I stood at a distance sometimes, just outside the circle. I didn't need to be in it. I was in all of it, already woven into every leaf, every root, every beam of the new bunkhouse rising under the summer sky. One evening, Dahlia and I sat beneath the stars with mugs of mint tea and watched the flicker of lanterns from the tents. "I don't think I've ever been this tired," she said, smiling. "But it's a good tired. The best kind," I said. "The kind that means you've poured yourself into something that matters." She looked over at me. "Do you think Dad would have liked this?" "He would have built it himself," I said, and cried every time someone said they felt safe here. She laughed. "He was such a softie." "And so are you," I said. "You just learned to carry it in strong hands." The fire crackled nearby. "Sometimes I still hear his voice," she said softly. "Not like a ghost, but like wind in the leaves, like he's in the soil." "He is." She sipped her tea. "You too, you know." "What?" "You're in all of this. Every corner, every seed, every story these women tell, you're the first chapter." I looked out at the land, the way it curved gently into the horizon, the way it had held us through drought, through grief, through betrayal. "I just kept the lights on," I said. She reached over, took my hand. "You were the light." We sat there long into the night, the stars like pinpricks of memory above us, the scent of basil and earth wrapping around us like truth. And I thought, some stories aren't about heroes and villains. Some stories are about survival, about growing roots so deep that even the fiercest storms cannot unearth them. It was nearly autumn again, the air thinner, the sunsets deeper. The leaves had only just begun to change, brushing the edges of the ranch in burnt gold and rust. A year had passed since the wedding that wasn't. A year since the note. Since the truth split everything open. And in that year, something sacred had taken root. The rooted way had grown slowly, carefully, with integrity. Not into a business, not into a brand, into a home, a sanctuary. Dahlia now led workshops across the region. She'd been interviewed on 2 podcasts. A journalist from the Denver Chronicle had come out last month to write a feature called Healing on the Hilltop. But she didn't chase the attention. She only ever chased the soil, the story, the next woman brave enough to say, "I need help." I watched her now from the back porch, her arms wrapped around a new guest, a woman who had arrived that morning with red eyes and a silence heavy enough to press down her shoulders. Dahlia didn't try to fix her. She simply stood with her, witnessed her. That was her gift. That was always her gift. Later that evening, she found me in the greenhouse, pruning the thyme. "You busy?" she asked, leaning in the doorway. "Only with stubborn herbs." She stepped in, brushed soil from the bench, and sat. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what comes next." I looked up. "I want to create something more permanent," she said. "A legacy." "You already have." "I know, but I want to formalize it. A foundation, a scholarship fund for women rebuilding their lives, partnering with shelters, advocacy groups, even lawyers for survivors in legal trouble." End quote. She exhaled. "I want to plant seeds that outlive me." I set the shears down, walked over, and took her hand. "You're not just healing anymore," I said. "You're multiplying healing. That's the mark of someone who's come full circle." She smiled, quiet, and full of something ancient. "I'm ready." That weekend, we held a small gathering at the ranch. Not for publicity, just to mark the year. Former retreat participants returned, some with partners, others alone. All of them different than when they had first arrived. We walked the land together, shared meals, built a new fire pit, and in the evening, we gathered by the bench on the trail, the one with our names carved in cedar. Dahlia stood in front of it, holding a small box. "I found something," she said, her voice soft but clear. "A while back, going through Dad's things. A letter he wrote, labeled, 'For her first fall.'" She looked at me. "I think it was meant for you, Mom." Finally, Under said. I stepped forward, surprised. She handed me the envelope. The others waited quietly as I opened it, the paper worn and trembling in my fingers. "Ruth, when you fall, and you will, because life doesn't spare the strong, I want you to remember this. The ground may hurt, but it's also where things grow. Don't run from it. Don't rush through it. Sit, breathe. And when you're ready, plant something. I'll be waiting in every root. Love, David." I couldn't speak. Dahlia placed a hand on my back, steadying me as tears came not of grief, but of completion. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stepped out onto the porch alone. The moon hung low over the hills, the stars sharp and endless. I walked out to the field barefoot, feeling the earth beneath me. And I knelt. I pressed my palm into the dirt, the way David used to, the way Dahlia does now. And I whispered, "Thank you." Because some stories don't end with triumph. They end with truth, with legacy, with light passed from hand to hand, mother to daughter, woman to woman. This was never a story about a wedding. It was a story about a root, and how far it can reach when watered with courage. This story reminds us that strength isn't about never falling, it's about what we choose to grow after the fall. Through betrayal, heartbreak, and silence, a mother and daughter found their way back to each other, not by erasing the pain, but by facing it together. The real healing began when they stopped hiding from the truth and started planting seeds of purpose, justice, and love. It teaches us that the deepest roots are often born in the darkest soil, and with enough light, they can rise into something unbreakable.